I'm going to be talking about John Gotti's offender background. John Joseph Gotti Jr. was an American gangster and boss of the Gambino crime family in New York City. Born in the Bronx of New York City in 1940, his first news coverage was when he was 14. Gotti's toes were crushed when he tried to steal a cement mixer. The accident gave the mobster-to-be his trademark gait and earned him another incident on his list of petty crimes. At the time of his final arrest, before he was sentenced to jail, he was convicted of 13 criminal accounts, including murder and a whole bunch of stuff we'll get into later. I never lie because I don't fear anyone. You only lie when you're afraid. One of his most famous quotes.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about nature of offense. So I'm going to start with a little timeline. So in 1940, John Gotti was born in Bronx, New York, along with his 12 brothers and sisters. So him and his family came from Naples, Italy. They grew up poor, and actually, all five of John's brothers ended up becoming mobsters with him. So in 1956, when John was 16, John drops out of high school. Being poor and having no real role model didn't give him any motivation to go get a real job, so ends up going into the life that we know. So in 1962, he gets married and ending up having 5 kids. And, this story is a little different than the normal ones because obviously John Gotti is involved with organized crime, more or less, than like a murderer or serial killer. So in the 1960s, he's actually involved with a lot of truck hijacking. So he's stealing stuff from trucks. And at the end of the 60s, he actually ends up going to jail for it. So he ends up getting out of jail in 1972 and works for the family under Neil Delacroix. So he's kind of his mentor during from then on out. One of his first jobs he gets to do. So in 1973, he actually ends up killing James McBratney, who actually killed a nephew of Carlo Gambino earlier that year. So because of this killing, it was sort of sloppy, and because of that, he ends up going to jail for 4 years. But that also did get him in good with the family. He helped out and ended up doing the family a favor. So he ends up getting out, and then is involved with killing Vito Borelli, who was supposedly openly talking about his dislike towards Paul Castellano. So this actually probably worked out good for him because the next year in 1976, Carlo Gambino dies and appoints Paul Castellano as new boss. So now Gotti should be in good with him. So after 76, John Gotti actually is released out of prison and ends up kind of like being officially introduced to the family as a made man. So going on in 1980, actually had a little hiccup where John's 12-year-old kid got hit by a car and killed by his neighbor John Favera. So because of that, anything like that happens, likely going to retaliate. So that ended up happening with his son, and kind of continues on to just tell the story of the kind of way they go about their life. If something bad happens to them, they'll go get revenge. So continue going on. They got involved into the drug scene a little bit, and actually one of Gotti's best friends, Angelo, and his brother end up getting arrested for heroin trafficking. So another little hiccup, and because mobsters more so normally are against drug dealing, that was certainly something that wasn't good for him. So going forward in 1985, Paul Castellano is now the new boss, and him and his underboss are actually gunned down in front of Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. So this actually ended up being John Gotti who carried this out and made the plan, but at the time it wasn't actually confirmed that that was what happened. Then going forward, John Gotti's actually named as the actual boss of the whole family. So hearing about his life a little bit, you can kind of tell how he based his victims. His victims are always based on like whether they interfered with the family or any type of family business, or if there was any wrongdoing they did to each other, and that was actually how they carried the hits out. And all more often than not, actually, is they would get their own hitmen to do it rather than them doing it themselves, which continued on with the organized crime method and continued helping them not get caught, right? So, and so John Gotti actually ended up going to jail and being arrested for good in 1990 at the age of 50. So throughout his life, he'd been arrested multiple times, been to jail for a couple times, but the one that actually really got him for good was in 1990. He had been arrested and was actually put on trial for 5 counts of murder and racketeering charges. So John Gotti ended up being found guilty, and mainly was actually because of his main hitman, Sammy the Bull, who actually turned out to be an informant for the FBI. And he was the person that ended up actually causing everyone to know what happened and what was ultimately why John Gotti was brought down in the end.
John Gotti was an organized crime boss in New York. Gotti was a very organized offender. In his case about the murder of mob boss Paul Castellano on December 16th, 1985, Gotti played a big role in that killing by sitting in his Lincoln sedan with tinted windows across the street from Sparks Steakhouse. When Castellano's car pulled up, Gotti got on his walkie-talkie and ordered for his men to take the hit. Once this hit was done, Gotti slowly pulled away, glancing at the body one last time, as if he had nothing to do with it. This is why I think Gotti shows signs of both mixed and organized offender, because he was so involved in these crimes, but yet, in this case, he never pulled the trigger, but he was meters from within the crime scene. John Gotti is a very psychopathic businessman who wanted power and money. He was involved in almost every incident that happened with his gang, but not firsthand. He was so careful about getting caught, so he made the others take the heat for him. AKA Sammy the Bull, Gotti's right-hand man, took a lot of the direct street hits, as well as paying for Gotti's jury cases and threatening the jury for a lot of Gotti's cases. Until the later years, Sammy the Bull got asked to take all the heat for Gotti's murder of Castellano, and Sammy the Bull turned sideways on him. So Gotti was a very daring individual. In his younger years, he wasn't so organized, and he did more reckless things from the age 18 to 26. He went to prison 9 times during that period. These were much more petty crimes than in his mob bossing years. These crimes included hijacking, cargo theft, and violence. The signature weapon for most of these killings was a gun, and Gotti was rarely ever the one to make these kills. It's always his men. And the types and number of wounds that these victims got was shot multiple times in many of these cases.
There are many risk factors that contributed to John Gotti's mafia involvement and involvement in mafia-related crimes. The first would have to be growing up poor. John Gotti's family immigrated from Naples, Italy to New York before he was born. John Gotti was born. He had 12 siblings. His father and his mother struggled to provide for the family. They would grow up very poor. John Gotti and his siblings saw his family struggle. John Gotti's father would work as a day laborer. He would struggle to provide for the 12 children and his wife. Gotti came to resent his father for being unable to provide for his family. I believe there's a direct connection between growing up in poverty and having that desire, that greed, that would push an individual to commit such crimes. The second risk factor that John Gotti would face would be growing up in an area known for crime. That portion of Brooklyn was very known for crime, particularly gangs and mafia involvement. Gotti and his family moved very frequently. They settled in East New York. As a teenager, Gotti became a leader of a local gang. Growing up in an area that was riddled with gang activity was not helpful to John Gotti. If he had not grown up in such a poor area, there might have been different circumstances. He could have potentially not chosen the life he did. The last risk factor that John Gotti faced would have to just be showing signs of criminal behavior as a young teenager. In high school, John Gotti was known to display violent behavior, fighting fellow classmates. John Gotti would end up dropping out of high school and not pursuing education again due to the fact he was always suspended, and he ended up just getting more involved in that gang activity in the streets of Brooklyn. After dropping out of high school, on multiple occasions, he was faced with the law, mostly for petty crimes, 9 times between the ages of 18 and 26. John Gotti was a very active street member, and this is what he was known for. He was known to be a mean guy. John Gotti was faced with many risk factors that would lead him to his mafia involvement and involvement in mafia-related crimes. I believe the 2 most prominent risk factors that would lead John Gotti into this life would be growing up poor. It made John Gotti desire wealth so much that he would do anything for it. I would have to say the second most prominent risk factor would have to be the area where he grew up. Brooklyn and the rest of New York was known for mafia-related crimes, gang activity, all of which would contribute to John Gotti getting involved in the life and ultimately committing the crimes that he did.